What would you do if your greatest opportunity for glory in years will end up sabotaged by your own team? And if the tests were not a mistake but part of a deliberate plan to make you fall? Charles Leclerc arrived in Budapest as a pilot pressed, frustrated, and with minimal expectations. He had publicly described the Hungaroring as his weakest circuit of the calendar, a place where the statistics turned his back completely. 7 appearances without podiums, just once inside the top 5. This public admission, far from being an excuse, was a cry of honesty that undressed the tense relationship he had always had with this narrow, technical, and medium rhythm route. And yet, when the Q3 on Saturday began, everything changed. Leclerc not only achieved a quick lap, he achieved the return. An impossible return to replicate, explain, or even understand. He himself, still with the helmet placed and the voice broken by the effort, said it when he got out of the car, "I don't understand anything in Formula One today." That statement was the beginning of a series of questions that are still without answers. Under normal conditions, Leclerc had no rhythm for pole. In Q2 it had ended 6th, and previous career simulations during the free suggested that both McLaren and Mercedes had a more consistent rhythm. But at that precise moment, under the Hungarian heat and with crossed winds that had begun to change direction, Ferrari found a technical window that seemed designed for that only attempt. The technical key was the extreme aerodynamic configuration that Ferrari decided to mount on its SF25 exclusively for classification. This version of the car was not the same as I had shot in the free. The rear suspension, updated in SPA weeks before, allowed working with lower handling heights and generated surprising rear stability. When lowering the center of gravity and modifying the rake, tilt of the chassis, the SF25 gained traction precision, something vital in the slow and medium speed of the Hungaroring. According to internal reports, it was even played with minimal tire pressures, taking advantage of the technical tolerances to the limit of the regulation. All that, combined with the cross breeze that affected the pilots who qualified later, created an ideal setting only for Leclerc. Oscar Piastri was only 26 thousandths and Russell less than a tenth, but none had that air cleaning that Charles enjoyed in his return. That pole was not just technique. It was political. It was emotional. It was historical. But it was also suspicious. Anonymous sources within the paddock, especially of the Mercedes environment, began to question whether Ferrari had manipulated variables beyond what was accepted. There were patterns in telemetry that did not coincide with the traditional data of the SF25 in high-load circuits. There was even talk of altered motor modes for classification and an electronic traction control system that, although prohibited in the current F1, could have been simulated through the management of torque in the curve outputs. And here appears the first narrative crack. If Ferrari really had such a higher package, why hadn't he shown it before? Why keep it for a circuit in which Leclerc felt weak? Was it a team's master play, or an internal commitment to benefit one of its pilots above the other? The race began with a postcard that few hoped to see in 2025, a Ferrari leading with absolute authority. Charles Leclerc kept the pole with a clean start, impeccably defended the interior in the first curve, and from there, began to build a margin that increased around after. Hungaroring, famous for its difficulty in advance, became its private circuit. For almost 40 turns, the SF25 was a perfect machine. McLaren engineers, direct rivals for the championship, soon expressed their surprise. In internal meetings, there was talk that Leclerc's rhythm was unusually constant. Not only was the leadership, but he did it with a level of tire management that had not been seen in any previous career. The first stint with middle compounds was almost surgical, without blockages, without excesses, without complaints on the radio. Ferrari seemed to have found the magical formula. The career strategy was executed with Switzerland precision, and the radio messages were minimal, almost all of confirmation. There were no external indications of problems or pressure. The paddock began to murmur something that seemed impossible until that moment. Ferrari had dominated each key variable of the race. And that, in Formula One, is synonymous with distrust. The turning point came without warning. At first glance, everything remained the same. But on Vuelta 29, Charles Leclerc broke the silence. "I can feel what we argue before the race. We need to discuss those things before doing them." That message was recorded by millions of viewers as a simple technical note, one of those phrases that usually go unnoticed. But for radio specialists, it was an unequivocal sign that something had been modified without approval. The following turns confirmed that it was not a paranoia. The SF25 began to lose adhesion in slow curve, suffers unusual locks in braking, and most importantly, it no longer had speed in the lines. Piastri, who until that moment could only continue at a distance, began to cut half a second by return. The car's performance had changed abruptly and without an obvious external reason. Ferrari did not report mechanical problems, and from boxes no explanation was offered to the performance fall. Fans began to speculate: technical failure? Strategy error? Or anything else? A thorough analysis of telemetry filtered to the press revealed anomalous patterns in the motor torque after the first pit stop. The power delivery curves had changed subtly, affecting the rear axle traction. This suggests that certain electronic parameters were reprogrammed during the boxes that, without being illegal, can deeply alter the car's response. The strange thing is that these changes were not mentioned in the technical brief or communicated to the pilot. Worse, they did not appear in the original mapping agreed between Charles and his career engineer. The Monegasque went from leading with solvency to fight not to fall out of the podium. In less than 10 laps, its advantage disappeared. First Piastri, then Norris, and then Russell passed it with relative ease. The SF25 was no longer the same car, and Leclerc knew it. His radio messages became more frequent, more urgent, almost desperate. "What's happening? This is not the car we had before," he said in Vuelta 38. The silence from the wall was revealing. Brian Botzi, his engineer, avoided responding clearly. He used generic phrases, vague instructions on brake temperatures and tires. He never directly admitted that an adjustment had been made without authorization. But for Leclerc, who knows his car better than anyone, the difference was impossible to ignore. For many, that was the exact moment in which the confidence between pilot and team broke. In a sport where margins are millimeter and information is to be able to modify the behavior of the car without the pilot's consent is not just imprudence, it is a technical betrayal. And what makes all this even more suspicious is the context. Ferrari came from a turbulent start of the season, with internal tensions due to technical leadership between the areas of development and career. Hamilton, a new star signing of the team, had demanded more weight on strategic decisions, and there was talk of friction for the priority of updates between both garages. Was Leclerc's pit stop a simple calibration error, or the result of a deliberate maneuver to weaken its position within the team? None of these questions have official answers, but the fall in performance, the change not communicated, and the tone in the voice of Leclerc opened the door to a much deeper story. The tragic turn in the history of Charles Leclerc during the Hungary Grand Prix was not simply a low performance. It was a structured technical collapse with characteristics too timely to be a mere coincidence. After the first pit stop, where Leclerc was expected to consolidate his advantage with fresh tires, the panorama was twisted without warning. The car lost speed in a straight line, the tensile in the curve outings became unpredictable, and, the most disturbing, the stability that had characterized SF25 in the first stint disappeared completely. Comparative telemetry analysis between the stints prior and after the change of tires reveals a deep modification in the behavior of the car. It is as if, instead of maintaining the same power map, a completely different, more conservative, less aggressive profile had been installed. One designed not to win but to survive. From Ferrari's pit wall, the answers were evasive. To each Leclerc consultation, the answers were vague. "We are monitoring, the data seem normal, avoids the curbs," a communication pattern that did not seek to solve the problem, but to contain it. What was later learned through engineering sources external to the team was even more disturbing. Ferrari apparently activated an intermediate calibration package that was not planned to be used in Hungary, a version that limits the mode of electrical power of the MGUK, thus reducing acceleration in low-speed areas. The justification? According to unofficial versions, it was a measure to protect the hybrid system after detecting potential overheating. But the temperature data available do not support that decision. There were no critical signs. There was no imminent risk. So why Ferrari applied a protection motor mode without clear failure? Here the most uncomfortable and feared theory is borne by any Scuderia fan, that the adjustment was deliberate. An act of internal sabotage, disguised as technical caution. We are not talking about cutting cables or damaging the car. We talk about a silent electronic decision, invisible to cameras, but devastating performance. A small software adjustment that, in a sport governed by thousands, is equivalent to starting the wings to a plane in full flight. Leclerc pole was an unexpected blow within that silent war. Not only because of the result, but for what it represented. The car had worked better under the pilot style of a pilot than many inside Maranello did not consider the favorite. His success in Hungary exposed those who had opted for a different technical direction. And in Formula One, success exposes, and annoyed. From that angle, what happened in the second half of the race becomes suspicious. A modification in the power unit without clear justification. A performance drop without human error. A chain of decisions that do not fit in the official story. The race ended with Leclerc outside the podium, visibly frustrated, isolated from his team in the closed park. There was no celebration. There were no hugs. Only silence and looks avoided. In a sport where millimeters decide titles, a sabotage is not always seen. Sometimes it is heard on a cryptic radio, it feels in a car that no longer responds, or discovered only when it is too late.